At Saratoga, a stone monument honors a general whose name it refuses to carve. It shows only a left boot, the part of Benedict Arnold that American memory was willing to keep. Before he became the Revolution's most notorious traitor, Arnold had helped seize a vital fortress, survived a march through the Maine wilderness, built a fleet from raw timber, and driven British troops back at Saratoga. Then he offered the enemy West Point for money and rank. How did one of America's most effective commanders become its lasting symbol of betrayal? The answer requires holding two truths together. Arnold was repeatedly wronged, and he still chose treason. That tension makes his life more than a simple morality play. If his courage is erased, his betrayal becomes impossible to understand. If his grievances are treated as an excuse, the people he endangered disappear from the story. Benedict Arnold was born in Norwich, Connecticut, on January 14, 1741. His family belonged to the town's respectable mercantile class. His father had inherited property, conducted business, and occupied a recognized place in the community. The security did not last. Several of Arnold's siblings died young, and his father's drinking gradually damaged both the family finances and its standing. His mother, Hannah, died in 1759 when Benedict was 18. His father died 2 years later, leaving debts and a reputation the son was determined not to repeat. It is tempting to turn that childhood into a complete explanation for everything that followed. The evidence cannot support so neat a diagnosis. Yet, public honor, financial independence, and recognition clearly mattered to Arnold throughout his adult life, often with unusual intensity. Family connections gave him a practical way forward. He apprenticed with Daniel and Joshua Lathrop, prosperous relatives who operated an apothecary and general trading business. There he learned bookkeeping, purchasing, medicines, and the complex networks that connected inland shops to Atlantic ports. By the early 1760s, Arnold had established his own business in New Haven. He sold medicines and books, invested in ships, and traded with Canada and the West Indies. He was energetic, commercially daring, and willing to take risks that more cautious merchants avoided. He could also be combative. Insults that another man might dismiss became questions of honor for Arnold. That sensitivity helped propel him through competition, but it also turned professional disputes into personal injuries. In 1767, he married Margaret Mansfield. They had 3 sons before she died in June 1775, while Arnold was already campaigning. The widower with 3 children, remembered by later accounts, was therefore a product of the war, not the man who first entered it. British trade restrictions and colonial resistance drew Arnold into politics. By 1775, he commanded a New Haven militia company. When news of Lexington and Concord arrived in April, he demanded access to the town's powder and marched his men toward Massachusetts. Arnold reached Cambridge with more than enthusiasm. He brought a specific military proposal. Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain guarded the corridor between Canada and the Hudson Valley, and its stores included artillery the Americans badly needed. Massachusetts commissioned Arnold as a colonel on May 3rd and authorized him to raise troops for the expedition. He hurried north, only to discover that Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys were already moving toward the same objective. The resulting command dispute foreshadowed much of Arnold's career. Allen had the men and their loyalty. Arnold had a formal commission and a detailed claim to authority. Neither man was inclined to yield, so they entered the fort together before dawn on May 10, 1775. The small British garrison was surprised, and Ticonderoga fell with little fighting. Arnold and Allen immediately disputed credit and control. Later retellings elevated Allen's theatrical presence, while Arnold's role became harder to separate from the quarrel that followed. Arnold did more than stand beside Allen at the gate. He organized an armed vessel on Lake Champlain and struck north toward the British post at St. Jean. His small force captured a larger sloop and briefly gave the rebels control of the lake, showing the speed and initiative that would define his early service. Arnold's Massachusetts commission was not simply revoked as punishment. The situation became tangled when new officers and troops arrived under other colonial authority. After resisting the loss of command, Arnold resigned his Massachusetts commission in June. The fort's capture still mattered. Later that year, Henry Knox began moving 59 captured guns toward Boston across roughly 300 miles of winter roads. Placed on Dorchester Heights in March 1776, that artillery helped force the British evacuation of the city. Arnold did not remain on the sidelines long enough to watch that result. He had already proposed a second operation, far more dangerous than the first. While another American force advanced through the Lake Champlain route, he would cross present-day Maine and approach Quebec City from the east. George Washington approved the plan and gave Arnold a Continental Commission. In September 1775, roughly 1,100 men left Cambridge. Their route followed rivers, portages, swamps, and forests that the expedition's maps described badly. The boats leaked, provisions spoiled, and distances proved longer than expected. Cold rain became early snow. Companies struggled against currents, hauled heavy craft over land, and watched their food disappear. The expedition crossed the Great Carrying Place, followed the Dead River, and descended the dangerous Chaudière. Floodwater scattered boats and ruined more supplies. Each loss multiplied the effect of the inaccurate route estimates, because food calculated for one distance had to sustain men across a much longer ordeal. Some men turned back before the worst of the journey. Others became sick or exhausted. By the time Arnold reached the St. Lawrence River, only about 600 of the original force remained fit enough to appear before Quebec. The march revealed the qualities that soldiers admired in him. Arnold shared exposure and hunger, moved among the men, and kept pushing when the expedition seemed close to collapse. It also revealed his willingness to pursue a plan after its margin for failure had nearly vanished. Arnold joined forces with Richard Montgomery, who had advanced from the west. On December 31st, during a snowstorm, they attacked Quebec City. The assault required separate columns to penetrate the lower town and unite beneath the defenses. The plan broke apart quickly. Montgomery was killed, Arnold was shot through the left leg, and the remaining attackers became trapped or withdrew. Daniel Morgan and hundreds of Americans were captured. Arnold survived and maintained a blockade outside the city while recovering. The failed attack did not bring the silence from Congress sometimes described in popular versions. In January 1776, he was promoted to Brigadier General. The promotion recognized leadership, not victory. Canada could not be held, and the American army eventually retreated toward Lake Champlain. Arnold's damaged leg began a cycle of pain, recovery, and renewed service that would follow him through the war. The retreat created another problem. A British force moving south by water could reach the Hudson Corridor, isolate New England, and threaten the rebellion's northern defenses. The Americans needed a fleet, although they possessed little time and almost no naval infrastructure on the lake. Arnold took charge of construction at Skensborough, now Whitehall, New York. Shipwrights, carpenters, blacksmiths, and soldiers turned green timber into gunboats, row galleys, schooners, and other improvised craft. Arnold learned the technical work quickly and pressed everyone around him to match his pace. By autumn, the American force numbered 15 vessels. The British assembled 29 and held clear advantages in guns, crews, and construction. Arnold could not expect a conventional victory, so he chose ground that might reduce those advantages. On October 11, 1776, he placed his fleet in the channel beside Valcour Island. The British passed the concealed position before turning to engage. Confined waters limited their ability to bring the whole fleet against him at once. The battle lasted for hours. American vessels took severe damage, and Arnold's flagship, Congress, was repeatedly struck. Darkness offered the surviving craft a narrow chance to escape through the British line. The maneuver succeeded for a time, but the retreat continued under pursuit. Arnold finally ran several damaged vessels ashore and burned them rather than surrender them. Only a small portion of his fleet escaped. The escape itself displayed careful seamanship. Under darkness, the Americans passed close to British ships that believed the damaged fleet remained trapped. The following pursuit destroyed most of what Arnold had built, but it forced the British to spend precious days finishing a fight they had expected to win quickly. Valcour Island was an American tactical defeat. It was also a strategic obstruction. The British advanced to Crown Point, but did not continue against Ticonderoga before winter, and their main invasion came the following year. It would be too much to say that Arnold alone saved the revolution on Lake Champlain. Campaigns do not turn on one man so cleanly. His resistance did, however, consume time the Americans used to prepare, and that time became important in 1777. Recognition still failed to arrive in the form Arnold wanted. On February 19, 1777, Congress promoted 5 brigadier generals junior to him while leaving him at his existing rank. Washington considered the decision unjust and urged patience, but patience was not Arnold's strength. The slight did not prevent him from fighting. During the British raid on Danbury, Connecticut, in April, Arnold helped rally militia and pursued the raiders toward the coast. Congress promoted him to Major General in early May, before the Saratoga campaign. Even that action left the original insult partly intact. Congress did not initially restore his seniority over the 5 men advanced ahead of him. Arnold had gained the rank, but not the place within it that he believed his record deserved. The Northern crisis soon demanded his attention again. British General John Burgoyne moved south from Canada with a powerful army, hoping to secure the Hudson route. Arnold first helped relieve Fort Stanwix by spreading deceptive reports that a much larger American force was approaching. The ruse exploited fear within the British Allied camp. Reports carried by a released loyalist suggested that Arnold's column was only the front of a vast American army. Indigenous allies departed, and the besieging force withdrew before Arnold reached the fort. He then joined the main army near Saratoga. Horatio Gates had replaced Philip Schuyler as commander, and the relationship between Gates and Arnold deteriorated almost immediately. Both were ambitious, but their military instincts and personal styles were sharply different. At Freeman's Farm on September 19th, Arnold helped direct the American left wing into hard fighting against Burgoyne's troops. Units associated with Daniel Morgan and Enoch Poor repeatedly attacked the British line. The battle ended without a decisive result, although Burgoyne's army could not easily replace its losses. Gates's report did not credit Arnold for his role. Their dispute over tactics, authority, and recognition became an open rupture. Popular accounts say Gates formally stripped Arnold of command, but surviving primary evidence does not establish so simple an order. What is clear is that Arnold had no effective field role when the armies fought again on October 7th. As the engagement developed, he rode into the action. Whether driven by anger, military judgment, or both, he began directing troops where the British position looked vulnerable. Arnold moved across the field under fire, gathering momentum around him. American attacks struck the British left, then pressed toward the fortified positions behind it. He drove men toward the redoubts when a more cautious officer might have stopped. At the Bremen redoubt, the attack broke through. Near the climax, a shot struck Arnold's left leg, and his horse fell on him. The wound landed close to the scar Quebec had already left. Burgoyne withdrew and surrendered his army on October 17th. Roughly 6,000 British and Allied troops passed into American hands. The victory at Saratoga helped persuade France to enter a formal alliance with the United States, transforming the scale of the war. No single officer won Saratoga. Gates commanded the army, Morgan and Poor led essential formations, and many soldiers carried the attacks. Yet Arnold's leadership on October 7th was conspicuous, aggressive, and costly to him. The wounded leg healed badly and remained shorter than the other. Arnold could walk, but pain and limited movement made a field command difficult. Congress restored his seniority in January 1778, recognition that came after much of the emotional damage had already been done. Had Arnold's story ended there, the unnamed boot at Saratoga would likely bear his name. Instead, the years after his greatest victory brought together debt, resentment, political conflict, and a decision that none of those pressures required. When the British left Philadelphia in June 1778, Washington appointed Arnold military commander of the city. It was a position suited to an officer who could not yet campaign. It was poorly suited to a man who treated criticism as an assault on his honor. Philadelphia was rich, divided, and politically volatile after occupation. Arnold entered elite social circles, maintained an expensive household, and pursued commercial ventures while exercising public authority. His taste for display exceeded the resources available to him. The city's conflict was not merely social. Pennsylvania's radical government distrusted families who had remained during the occupation, while commercial elites feared confiscation and political retaliation. Arnold placed himself between those factions and repeatedly acted as though military prestige could protect him from civilian scrutiny. His accounts with Congress added another source of bitterness. Arnold claimed reimbursement for money spent during earlier campaigns, while government auditors questioned portions of those claims and demanded documentation. The record does not support the simple claim that Congress unquestionably owed him a fortune. Pennsylvania's government, led by men hostile to Arnold, brought a series of accusations. A court-martial eventually acquitted him on most counts. It convicted him on two: improperly allowing a vessel to clear a closed port and using public wagons in connection with private goods. The sentence was a formal reprimand from Washington, delivered in April 1780. Washington softened the language by recalling Arnold's past service and expressing hope for future service. Arnold experienced the judgment as another public humiliation. But the reprimand did not cause his treason. By the time Washington delivered it, Arnold had been communicating secretly with the British for nearly a year. The chronology matters because it prevents grievance from becoming a false last straw. Another relationship had changed Arnold's world in Philadelphia. In April 1779, the 38-year-old general married 18-year-old Peggy Shippen. She came from a prominent family whose loyalties had leaned toward the crown, and she had known British Major John Andre during the occupation. Peggy's exact influence remains debated. Evidence in the surviving correspondence shows that she understood and assisted the secret exchange. Portions written in her hand appear inside coded communications, making it impossible to present her as an innocent observer. It is equally difficult to prove that she created Arnold's decision. He possessed his own ambitions, debts, and grievances. The safer conclusion is that Peggy became an active facilitator within a plan Arnold willingly pursued. In May 1779, Arnold opened a covert channel to British headquarters in New York. Messages moved through intermediaries, invisible ink, number codes, and a cipher based on a legal text. Arnold used the name Gustavus, while Andre often appeared as John Anderson. At first, Arnold offered intelligence and discussed the terms under which he might change sides. Over the following months, he transmitted information about American forces and plans. This was not one impulsive act committed in rage, but a continuing negotiation. Arnold later defended his change of allegiance with political language. He criticized congressional rule and the alliance with France, presenting himself as a loyal subject returning to Britain. Those statements formed part of his public defense, yet the bargaining also centered on compensation and military rank. Money was not a minor detail. Arnold wanted payment for losses he claimed to have suffered in the American cause, as well as security for himself and his family. British leaders wanted something valuable enough to justify the price. West Point supplied that value. Its fortifications overlooked the Hudson at a narrow bend, protected a great chain across the river, and anchored American control of the highlands. If Britain captured the position, Communication between New England and the other states would become far more difficult. Arnold sought the command with Washington's support and received it on August 3, 1780. Washington saw a veteran officer whose wounds made a defensive post appropriate. The British saw an opening inside one of the most important American positions. The appointment rested on years of shared danger. Washington had defended Arnold's promotion, trusted his combat record, and continued to treat him as a valuable officer after the court-martial. That personal history made the conspiracy more than an attack on stone walls. It converted confidence earned in earlier battles into a weapon. From West Point, Arnold sent detailed reports of troop strength, artillery, supplies, and defensive works. He also dispersed forces under his authority, leaving the central position less concentrated. Captured documents would later show how carefully he described the post's vulnerabilities. Some later stories add dramatic acts of sabotage for which evidence is weaker, including deliberately misdirected supplies or stolen food. The documented betrayal is grave enough without them. Arnold placed military information, his command, and the soldiers who trusted him at the disposal of an enemy. The proposed price for surrendering West Point was £20,000 sterling. Arnold also expected a British commission. Sir Henry Clinton, the British commander in New York, considered the fortress a prize that could alter the campaign. Negotiations remained difficult because messages crossed contested ground. Clinton needed direct confirmation, and Arnold needed a representative empowered to settle the plan. That task fell to Andre, Clinton's young adjutant general and intelligence chief. On the night of September 21st, Andre came ashore from the British warship Vulture near the western bank of the Hudson. He met Arnold and received papers describing West Point's defenses and garrison. Their conference lasted longer than intended. American fire forced the Vulture farther downriver, preventing Andre from returning by the same route. He then attempted to reach British lines overland. He traveled under the name John Anderson, carried a pass from Arnold, and wore civilian clothing for part of the journey. The papers went with him, concealed in his stockings beneath his boots. They included returns and descriptions in Arnold's hand. If Andre reached New York, the British would possess the information needed to coordinate an attack with the traitor commanding the target. On September 23rd, 3 armed militiamen stopped him near Tarrytown. Their names were John Paulding, Isaac Van Wart, and David Williams. Andre's answers raised suspicion, and their search uncovered the hidden papers. The captors rejected his attempt to secure release and delivered him to American authorities. A series of command decisions then created a dangerous delay. Lieutenant Colonel John Jameson initially sent a warning to Arnold before the full meaning of the evidence had been understood. Benjamin Tallmadge, experienced in intelligence work, recognized the threat and persuaded Jameson to retain Andre. The warning to Arnold had already gone. It reached West Point on the morning of September 25th as Washington approached for an inspection. Arnold did not wait to learn how much had been discovered. He left breakfast, hurried to the river, and boarded a small boat. The crew carried him down the Hudson to the Vulture, where he entered British protection. Washington arrived to find the commander absent and the expected defenses in troubling condition. The captured papers soon confirmed the plot. In a letter to Congress, Washington called it treason of the blackest dye. West Point remained in American hands. Arnold's escape denied Washington a prisoner, but it also marked the failure of the bargain's central purpose. The fort was reinforced, its scattered troops were recalled, and the British attack never came. Andre faced a board of American officers because he had crossed the lines under a false identity, traveled in civilian clothes, and carried secret military papers. The board judged him a spy. He appealed to be shot as a soldier, but the request was denied. He was hanged at Tappan, New York on October 2, 1780. Americans who condemned the plot still admired Andre's composure. His death gave the conspiracy a tragic figure who had not escaped its consequences. Arnold received a British commission as Brigadier General. Because West Point had not been delivered, he did not receive the full proposed price. British records indicate compensation of £6,315 sterling, along with a yearly pension of £360 sterling. The British also placed him over a loyalist formation known as the American Legion. Its name advertised the political message Britain hoped to send. Prominent rebels could still return to royal allegiance. Arnold issued public arguments for his decision, but the failed transaction at West Point overshadowed every defense he offered. His reception in British society was mixed, not uniformly hostile. The Crown and many loyalists valued his service, while Whig politicians and some army officers distrusted or shunned him. A man useful for changing sides could never fully escape questions about changing again. Washington approved an attempt to capture Arnold in New York and return him for trial. Sergeant Major John Sharper entered British-held territory as part of the plan, but operational changes placed Arnold beyond reach. The mission failed, and Sharper eventually returned to American service. Arnold now sought to prove his value in a British uniform. In January 1781, he led more than 1,000 troops up Virginia's James River. His force occupied Richmond and destroyed military stores, workshops, warehouses, and other supplies supporting the American war effort. The raid was destructive, but saying that Arnold burned the entire city overstates the evidence. Its purpose was to disrupt Virginia's ability to supply armies farther south. He later took part in additional operations around Petersburg and the Chesapeake. His final major campaign brought him back to Connecticut. On September 6, 1781, Arnold commanded a British and German force against New London and Groton, only a short distance from the region where he had grown up. The attackers destroyed ships, stores, and more than 100 buildings in New London. Across the Thames River, another column assaulted Fort Griswold. After the defenses were breached, Colonel William Ledyard and many members of the garrison were killed in violence remembered locally as a massacre. Arnold commanded the expedition, although he was not personally leading the assault inside Fort Griswold. The distinction matters for assigning specific acts, but not for understanding the operation. An officer who had once defended Connecticut now directed enemy troops against it. Weeks later, Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. Arnold's service to Britain had inflicted damage without reversing the war. In December 1781, he sailed for England, followed by a reputation neither uniform could contain. He did not encounter one consistent response there. King George III received him, and government officials considered his claims. Yet the major command and public restoration Arnold wanted never arrived. A clever remark is often attributed to the king, suggesting Arnold might betray Britain if Britain ever wronged him. No reliable contemporary evidence secures that line. Like Arnold's supposed final confession, it survives because it sounds exactly like what later generations believe someone should have said. Arnold returned to commerce, the arena in which he had first built himself. In 1785, he went to St. John, New Brunswick, and entered shipping, land speculation, and trade. Peggy and the rest of the family later joined him. The venture reproduced familiar patterns. Business disputes became lawsuits, and legal victory did not produce social acceptance. After a bitter slander case involving a former partner, local residents burned Arnold in effigy outside his home. It was an effigy, not his warehouse, that the strongest accounts describe burning. The correction changes the image but not the atmosphere. Even among loyalist settlers, Arnold found reputation harder to rebuild than capital. The family returned to London in 1791. Arnold continued commercial ventures connected to the West Indies and pursued recognition from the British government. War with revolutionary France created new opportunities, but none restored the stature he had once possessed in America. He remained restless enough to travel and speculate when declining health might have suggested retirement. At moments, he received praise for aiding British interests in the Caribbean. What he never received was the senior wartime command that might have recast him publicly as a British hero. His health steadily declined. Gout afflicted him, and the leg damaged at Quebec and Saratoga remained painful. Physicians of the time also described dropsy, a term then used for severe fluid retention associated with several illnesses. Benedict Arnold died in London on June 14, 1801, at age 60. He was buried at St. Mary's Church in Battersea. Later renovations and the movement of burials made the exact location of his remains uncertain, though the church now contains memorials to him. One often repeated story gives him a deathbed wish to wear his old Continental uniform and ask forgiveness for putting on another. Historians have found no dependable contemporary record of those words. The legend offers remorse that the documentary evidence does not. What the evidence does offer is more difficult. Arnold possessed genuine military talent and uncommon physical courage. He also possessed a fierce appetite for recognition, a habit of personalizing opposition, and a willingness to treat public service as an account that had to be settled in his favor. Congress and state officials made serious errors in dealing with him. Passing over his seniority was unjust, political rivalries often distorted credit, and the young government handled military accounts badly. Those failures help explain his alienation and deserve a place in the record. They do not explain away a year of coded correspondence. Arnold negotiated for money, supplied intelligence, sought West Point, and prepared to surrender men who had no part in his grievances. He made repeated choices with time between them to stop. That is why the Boot Monument at Saratoga remains so powerful. It stands near the ground where Arnold was wounded on October 7, 1777. Its inscription praises the brilliant soldier who helped win a decisive victory, but the stone contains no name. The omission is both recognition and judgment. America preserved the service because the service was real. It withheld the identity because later betrayal changed what the name meant. Yet history is strongest when it does not imitate the monument's silence. The soldier at Saratoga and the conspirator at West Point were not separate men. The same daring that once ignored danger could also ignore restraint, and the same hunger for honor could harden into a belief that loyalty was conditional. Arnold was neither a blameless victim nor a villain without a past. He was a celebrated officer who received real injuries, exaggerated some of them, and answered them with a calculated crime. A nation can owe a soldier fair credit without owing him obedience, wealth, or exemption from judgment. The stone boot leaves the final contradiction in view. Benedict Arnold helped preserve the American Revolution when its survival was uncertain. Then, convinced that his sacrifices entitled him to set the price of his allegiance, he tried to sell one of its strongest defenses. His life does not prove that neglected heroes inevitably become traitors. It proves the opposite. Grievance narrows the field of choice, but it does not eliminate choice. Arnold's name endures because, after all the wounds and all the slights, the decision was still his.